Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today's intro is going to be a little bit different, but stick around if you want to watch me work on this little spinning Masaki GIF. If you guys have seen any of my recent streams, I've been putting my spinning OC GIFs that I've made on Procreate from a while ago, kind of like on the bottom of my screen. I'll put a clip on the screen if you wish to see it. You're not in GB mode, yeah. I'm glad I was able to fix the tracking a little bit more, because apparently the lighting in this room is a little too dark. But we're gonna make one of Masaki, and if I have time, I will make maybe one more. I am leaning towards making probably Koji, but Akemi and Selwyn are also ones that I would like to make so that I could have my entire cast of OCs currently. So yeah, stick around if you want to see how Masaki turns out in terms of like a little spinning animation. Okay, let's start with the sketching though. Okay, yes, we're gonna work on the sketches first, but to get something kind of out of the way first, I do end up only making Masaki for the spinning gifs at this point, just because I did get a little bit too busy to end up making the rest of my OCs, but for the upcoming weeks, hopefully, I will be making the rest of my cast as well as the, I guess like some normal-ish ones for the rest of my OCs, so I think during like the little snippet, maybe I'll put them on the screen as well if I have time, but I've made festive ones or like holiday themed ones for Kaisen, Moriko, and Sato at the time. So Kaisen is in a pumpkin, he's very Halloween-y at this point, and then we have Moriko and Sato, which I did around like the winter holidays, so I dressed them up more in like Christmas-ish kind of attire for their little spinning gifs. Also, let me know, do you guys say gifs or gifs? I apologize. I believe the official person who made the term or the word says it's gif, but I have always just heard it as gif, so I'm just going to continue that, and if that bothers you, I'm sorry. But I would like to redo at least those three into something that like represents them a little bit more, or just turn all of my OCs into like little potted versions, because I think that's just very fitting for all of them. So the first one I did was Masaki in the little potted plant, which is what we are going to be doing today. Then I have my OC Akemi in kind of like a coffee mug. I was gonna draw him in more like a paper kind of coffee cup instead, but to kind of give it a little bit more dimension when it's spinning, I wanted to add the handle. And then for Koji, it's gonna be a ball, so it's gonna be round throughout, but at least the patterning is gonna help. So he's in a baseball. Kind of scooched them all over, made them a little bit smaller, and we're working on one more for kind of like the larger sketches that I ended up doing. So I did end up adding Selwyn. I thought it'd be cute just to place him in a little star and he could be holding like a little glowing floating sparkle or something like that. I'm gonna figure this out eventually, but I think all of them will just end up being potted plants at some point. But these could be like unique ones specific to like, you know, each individual OC. I did end up doing these smaller doodles down here just to give myself a reminder. So right away, I started to kind of just doodle Kaisen. So he's going to be also in a little potted plant. I might make his like dark green, or we might keep it like with a terracotta or dark brown, similar to Masaki's. And then after that, I decided to work on Moriko, because currently I couldn't really think of what object she could be inside of, because she's more affiliated with like a motorbike and like, I don't know, like adventurous, very peppy. She's more like the Genki type, so I haven't really associated her with any like something like more specific that could be an object that she could be inside of for a spinning gif. So I might just pick like a flower or something, or put her in a potted plant. And then last but not least, we have Sato in a little cupcake, because that's very easy for me to do as well. But eventually, yeah, all of them will be in potted plants. I also made two other versions off screen. I didn't include it in the actual, like, you know, time-lapse portion, but I wanted to add Masaki as a 4-leaf clover, and then on the very right-hand side, I wanted to add Koji as a 3-leaf clover, just because initially when I made Masaki first, I associated him with clovers just in general, but then when I made Koji, and because they have more of like that mentorship, kind of like big brother, little brother kind of vibe going on, I decided that he would be like a 3-leaf clover, like a smaller version, or something that's like more blossoming or like blooming. So I also associate him with like little sprouts as well. So that could be an option for the future. But let's work on the actual file for our spinning GIF. So my previous spinning gifs were all done on Procreate, so I just went ahead and exported one of the frames that I had for Moriko into Clip Studio Paint. The canvas size that I'm using is 2048 by 2048, so we're keeping it nice and square. I also pulled up our timeline for our animation instead of making a animation file right away, because there's a lot of like settings and stuff I was not too sure that I was going to be sticking with right away, so we're just gonna do it this way instead. Not gonna lie, I kind of forgot what was the frame rate and amount of like frames that I had for each of the animations that I did of my spinning OCs, but all of them do follow a very specific pattern, and I'm not an animator. I usually do frame by frame if I ever do want to do animating, or more recently I use Live 2D, but learning how to do animation in Clip Studio Paint did take me a little bit getting used to again, since I've only dabbled every so often doing like small animations on here. So to kind of start off, I went ahead, made a timeline, and I made a new animation folder. So from my knowledge in Clip Studio Paint, an animation folder is considered like a layer, as if you were drawing normally, and then a layer is considered a cell inside of your animation folder. I don't know how to explain it. It makes sense if you start to watch other people's tutorials and actually dabble into it. So I was able to find an okay workflow and start to block in our spinning GIF. So to keep things very simple, the spinning GIF is basically just like a character turnaround, but I kept it very minimal. So starting off with our first frame, which is front facing, then I will have kind of like spinning towards the left side of the canvas. So it will go 3/4 and then profile, and then we'll go the back 3/4 facing the left, and then we have just the back, and then we have back 3/4 facing the right. Then we have the profile facing the right, and then we have the 3/4 facing right, but you're facing forward, and then we're back to our starting point, which is the front facing. So if you ever see like the blue and the pink, that's me using the onion skin, so I can more or less try my best to get everything lined up. Like I said, I'm not super into like animating, and I'm not very like proficient in it, so there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be misaligned or not like proportionate, so do please bear with me. I don't think the end result is too bad. I still think it's very cute. And these kinds of like smaller projects that I like to do for my OCs are just like, you know, something to do for fun, and they're more like personal, so I can just like mess around with whatever I want with them. So after I started to play the playback, I noticed that he was spinning a little bit too fast, and I wanted him to be similar-ish speed to the rest of my spinning GIFs, like the one of my OC Kaisen. So I ended up, I think, having it down to, I think it's 12 frames per second instead of the 24, so that we have a smaller little turnaround, or like a shorter turnaround, I guess. Then going back to my first frame, I went ahead and started to actually sketch out in a little bit more detail of what I wanted the kind of like overall look to look like. So we're just going to sketch out Maseki, and we're just going to go through each individual frame. So like I said, starting with front facing, we'll go 3/4, we'll go half or like profile, and then kind of work our way around. Now, one thing I did notice that I was going to be struggling with, and I told myself that I would just worry about it later, which you're gonna see me kind of struggle a little bit when I start to do the line work, was the fact that I was not sure how to copy and paste without making a new frame. I just wanted to copy and paste an element and put it into a frame, but there was no way for me to merge them for some reason. But I do figure out a solution, and hopefully you guys will be able to see it once we get to the line art portion. But kind of like the shorter way to explain it is that if you want to copy and paste, or like use any other like tools and stuff without any restriction on your cell or your frame, you can pop it out of your animation folder, just like place it above, do all your corrections, whatever you want, and then pop it back into your folder and make sure it's named properly. So in this case, I didn't really have to do it too much. I think I might end up copy and pasting it once we start to work on Maseki's backside, because I wanted his silhouette to match basically the flipped version of the front facing one, so that I knew his hair was kind of like going in the correct direction. I think this also makes more sense if you've ever done like a reference sheet where you take basically the silhouette or the outline of your OC front facing, pasting it and flipping it so you have the back version, and just erasing all of the elements on the inside so you have a flipped version of the silhouette. I often do this as well if I do front and backs for doing little, I guess, like acrylic charms. If you want like the back side of a character and you want to make sure that nothing exceeds the silhouette of your front facing portion, it's just a good way to keep everything contained and hopefully more or less proportion if you do end up drawing the back side of your character. So I think the most tedious portion is sketching in the line art for me. Also, I think it's also due to the fact that I spent a lot of time just experimenting and trying to figure out how the animation functions in Clip Studio Paint work. And I was doing that mostly when I was doing the sketching portion rather than doing it during like any other time prior to working on this project. But now that the sketch is finished, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of lower the opacity of our first animation folder, and then we're going to go ahead and use the Milli Pen for our line art. Now, I don't know why I set my background to pink. Later on, I'm gonna find it easier to do the line art in gray because I was not able to see my onion skin, which is like the blue and pink lines later on. They kind of get a little bit harder to see. I don't know if it's due to the lack of contrast, but later on I think it's easier either to be on just a white canvas or to be on like a light gray. It's just easier for me to see the black lines and to see my onion skins. So I don't know why I chose pink. Maybe I thought it was just cute to kind of like look at it at this point. But for the line work, I ended up making another animation folder so that we could do our line work on top of our sketch. So like I mentioned, I lowered the opacity for my sketch, and then we went ahead and started to do the line art with the Milli Pen. And I had to make sure that all of my sketch lines were matching up correctly with the line art layers that I wanted to work with. Or I guess like the other way around, because I think it's 8 frames, but they last for 2 counts, or guess. Like, I don't know what are the animation terminologies, so please excuse me. But my duration for my animation, I think it's about 16 or 17 frames. So it's like a duration of 2 almost. And because of that, I have to make sure that I'm not accidentally lining in between like frame 1 and frame 3. So like, let's say if I started doing the line art for frame 2, then it's not really matching up with my sketch and it's gonna throw everything off. But these kind of like spinning gifs or like little turnarounds for my OCs are always like a fun way if you want to do like a very simple kind of animation that's not like just a static kind of front-facing character with like a waving hand or just like simple blinking. The turnaround is just kind of fun. I don't think I did the best in terms of interpreting how I wanted Masaki's hair to be when it's turning in that direction. Luckily, having the sprout, or if I didn't add his sprout, then the ahoge on his head, like the little tick of hair that like comes out of his head, would help me give a little bit more direction of his head spinning, because it is placed more on, I guess like on the canvas. It'll be closer to the left side of his head, more so than in like dead in the center. And then one of the biggest problems I had, and I noticed this when I was sketching right away, is that his body, or the way how chibis are proportioned, I was not able to put his neck directly in the center of the pot because of where his head is, because it's so huge and large. So there are times where it feels like his body is pushed more forward towards like where his hands are on the pot. So because I knew I wasn't going to be able to correct it properly, I ended up just pushing that portion a little bit more, so making it actually look like he's more towards the front of the pot while he's spinning. So that's something I wish I kind of considered and fixed prior to doing the line art, but that's something for future me to worry about if I ever want to redo these. But next up is coloring. So I went ahead and made another folder once again, but I placed it underneath my line art and above my sketch so that my line art can remain on top. And for every frame of line art that I want to color, I do set it to the reference layer so that I can easily bucket on a different layer and not have to worry of going back and forth so often to make sure that I'm filling the right line art, if that makes sense. So because of that, it does make it a lot easier for me to color. That's like one thing I found a little bit annoying whenever I work on making like the little spinning guys on Procreate, is that it's a lot of back and forth of having to go and sift through your layers, and like the organization's a little bit more difficult for me to navigate because there's so many layers together. And usually by the end I do end up merging some of the layers together so that I condense it, rather than having, I think it's like 4 different layers per, or it's like even 5 at this point I think, per folder, which happens to be a frame for animation. So if I do have 8 and I have at least 5 including the folder name, then let's say it's 6, so I might have like 48 things to scroll through, which is very annoying. I don't think this is like the proper way, but I would actually have to add in shadows and our highlights afterwards. So I am mostly doing just the base coloring for Masaki, but I decided to do the shading for his skin pretty much like right away when I started to fill in our flats, because I knew what color I was going to use for our overall shadows, which tends to be either like a bluish purple, a purpley red, or something like that. And I feel like it just doesn't work as well for the skin. And oftentimes, because I do lean it a little bit on the cooler side, it just looks a little bit more like gray on top of like our beigeish, peachish base for his skin tone. So instead of doing that, I decided to just shade as is. I'll add in like the little blush lines and everything, and then I will do shadows and highlights for absolutely everything else right now on their own separate folders. So I made another folder above my coloring layer but below my line art still, and set that entire folder to multiply. Now occasionally I'll use the selection tool to help me block out certain areas so I don't have to clean up as much, but I found this a little bit easier so that I can keep shading pretty much consistently, but it's also made things a lot faster so I don't have to keep flipping in between colors. But for our shadows, I did end up using kind of like it's like a bit more of a cooler purple in this case, but I thought it kind of worked for the majority of the colors that he had. He has a lot more of like cooler colors, as well as the brown looks nice with this type of purple rather than going too warm where it might look a little bit too monotoned. One thing that kind of threw me off is the fact that this pot, the shading is going to be super irregular, but I made it that way because the pot base is completely the same throughout all the frames, and because of that it kind of makes it look like that Masaki within the pot is just spinning and the pot itself is not moving at all, other than when you can actually see his hands, which luckily I did place so that, you know, you can kind of tell where the front is, so hopefully it does read as, you know, him turning. I was gonna see if me putting some sort of like pattern on the pot was gonna help make it look like it's turning a bit more. So in my initial sketch, I did put like a little 4-leaf clover in the bottom portion towards like the right side of the pot, so that there would be something spinning along with it. But as you can see, I kind of forgot about it, and I ended up just shading the pot a little bit differently every time, and hopefully still giving that illusion that, you know, the pot is indeed spinning. And last but not least, we are going to be doing highlights. So highlights, I decided to pick out kind of like an intense yellowy orange color, and kind of similar to the shadows, I tried my best to highlight the pot different every so often so that it still gives an illusion of it moving and turning, but it doesn't really make sense, like, I guess like in real life, if there was like a very static light on something that's very symmetrical and it's spinning and turning, it would still hit, you know, very similarly. Like it's not going to really change, but I needed something to create it so that it would look a little bit different, so that we knew the pot was spinning along with Masaki and he's not like perpetually spinning within a pot. Last but not least, so we're doing the last part of the little spinning chibis that I end up doing, is that I want to color in the line art. So I went ahead, alpha locked all my lines, and individually went to do the eyes, which I gave like a little half circle with a, it's basically my derp eye, so a white kind of iris circle in the center, and then we have like a half kind of color at the bottom. And then I also went ahead and colored in some of the skin areas because I thought it would make things look a little bit softer. Sometimes I choose like lighter lines, or like I will color in lines that are just within the outline, but this time I just did, you know, very minimal just to make things a little bit easier for myself. This might be a little bit stupid, but I do have a PureRef board on PureRef, just in general, of all of my little spinning gifs, because before, I forget what I was using it for, but this is just like how I keep track of all of them, and like I can kind of view them all at once spinning. It's kind of a large file, so I don't recommend doing this, but here they kind of all are. We have Masaki, Kaisen, Sato, and Moriko. But I think that's it for today's video. I'll let Masaki as well as the rest of my OCs who do have like the little spinning version of them join on the screen at this point, and I will talk to you guys next time in the next video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me make something a little bit silly, but bye!